WBZ's Louisa Moeller spoke with retired Army Brigadier General Kevin Ryan, who's an expert on the war between Russia and Ukraine. He shared his thoughts on the White House's efforts for a peace deal between those two countries.
So if you wouldn't mind, I would love to go back to your March trip to Ukraine? And would you feel comfortable sort of setting the scene of, how did any opportunity for peace seem at that point? And that was right after President Zelensky's meeting in the Oval. What was the environment at that time?
So I arrived in Kyiv, Ukraine, to teach at the Kyiv School of Economics in January of this year. And at the time, the new U.S. administration was just coming on board. President Zelensky and his administration was trying to, synchronize with them. There were some ominous, I will call them, signs coming from the new administration that they were not going to support Ukraine militarily or financially, at least not in the way the U.S. has been supporting up to now. And soon after, we had the infamous meeting in February in the Oval Office, and things really looked like they were hitting bottom between the two countries. But both Zelensky, let's talk about President Zelensky, made a real effort to try and repair that relationship, which had tanked in February in the Oval Office. The Ukrainians were quick to tell me that in their mind, the reason that Zelensky and Trump had this blowup in the Oval Office was because both Zelensky and Trump are very similar in their leadership styles. They're both transactional. They both come from business backgrounds, the media, the entertainment business. And they both came to power saying that they were going to make big changes in the government from what was previous. And so when you needed a diplomat in the White House, they didn't have one. They had two businessmen who were sticking to their guns. So the Ukrainians were, I think, they were a little less surprised with this than the Americans were. And,
Interesting.
And since then, President Zelensky has done a lot of work to make this relationship work.
So now we're at this point today, and how optimistic are you feeling about this second meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky?
Well, I'm optimistic in this sense that I believe President Trump, for all of his gaffes or his administration's gaffes, President Trump has gotten us much closer to a ceasefire or peace deal than we have been since this war started. So that is the good news, and he deserves credit for that. He may be criticized in how he's been doing that, or how much he's gone over to the Kremlin side on looking at this war. But he's given President Zelensky and the European leaders a chance to weigh in now and to come up with their own response to a Russian proposal, or at least a Russian perspective on this. So I'm optimistic that the European leaders and President Zelensky, they're smart people, they are motivated to end this war. I think that they could find common ground moving forward, but it is not going to be easy, and it will not be done today. President Zelensky today will be making his point that there are certain things that Ukraine cannot give up. Territory would seem to be one of those. Although I believe that if everything else were in place for Ukraine, like security guarantees, which means troops on the ground, not just promises, but actual European, U.S. troops on the ground, and the Ukraine retained its right to run its military the way it wanted to, that asking Ukraine to give up its NATO aspirations and even something as major as Crimea, that I think that could happen if the wording were right and the other things were there.
I've heard this discussion around what Putin wants, which is a peace deal, and what President Zelensky wants, which is an immediate ceasefire. What's the difference between the two, and which would benefit either country?
Well, President Zelensky would accept a peace deal right now and go straight to a peace deal if it was a legitimate and full-fledged peace deal that protected Ukraine's rights. But when President Putin uses the word peace deal, it's code for all of the things that Russia wants, which is Ukraine to declare it won't be in NATO, all of NATO forces and weapons out of Ukraine, and so on. These are and the promise that Ukraine will keep its military small and will not object to Russian occupation of Crimea and so on. That's a peace deal to President Putin, and of course that's nowhere near a peace deal to the rest of the world, much less to President Zelensky. But a ceasefire is in the preferred way is an unconditional ceasefire. It means that both sides stop fighting. They both stop shooting and killing the people on the other side. And of course, this would be great for Ukraine because Ukraine is losing every day, just a little. They're not losing a lot, but every day they lose some territory to the Russian war machine, which is obviously an incentive for Putin not to agree to a ceasefire since his troops are advancing.
So that was actually leads to my next question. I was going to ask you, what are conditions on the ground like in Ukraine, especially for civilians?
Well, for the civilians who are in the eastern part of Ukraine, Sumy, Kharkiv, in Donetsk, and those places that have not been occupied by the Russian forces but are, say, within 100 miles of the Russian forces, life is dangerous and life is very hard. Most of them have been evacuated. Some remain. And their lives are really affected by the war day to day. For the rest of the population in Ukraine, they are mostly affected by the war through what is happening to members of their family who have been moved to the front, or through the aerial bombardments that happen throughout Ukraine every day and every night. While I was there, Ukrainian air alerts in Kiev happened between 10 and 20 times a night. And I left in May to come back to the States for a while. And it was about that time that the Russian aerial attacks tripled and quadrupled. So it's even worse today. Those people are living with that reality every day, but they're not living with the reality of somebody marching into their city yet. So your average citizen wants peace. They're tired of the war. They're tired of the killing and the damage. But they also know that if they just simply give in to whatever the other side wants, they'll have a repeat of 2014 when Ukraine settled and went into the Minsk peace talks, spent several years in those talks fruitlessly trying to get a real peace. And all that ended in 2022 with Russia re-invading Ukraine. So they are smart enough to know that they have to avoid that. They can't allow that to happen.
So to sum it all up, it sounds to me like you are definitely more optimistic about chances for peace now than you were earlier in the spring? And would you say we're at the closest point yet that we've been for a potential peace deal or ceasefire deal?
Right. Right now, we are the closest we've been to ending the fighting and the killing in Ukraine. We have an offer on the table from the Russian side, which includes allegedly, I haven't seen it, but allegedly includes some things that Ukraine has been asking for, security guarantees of a sort. Although the devil is in the details, we really don't know what that is. But also a stopping the war along the current line of contact, which is tantamount to a ceasefire. Again, although Russia demands that Ukraine withdraw from Donetsk and that they recognize the seizure and control of Crimea. So, but we are closer, and we have something to debate and to discuss, and we'll have to see what the responses are after today.
I think my last question, sir, is obviously we can understand why Europe is so invested in this conversation, but why should the average American citizen care about peace and the end to this war?
So what happens in Ukraine is important to Americans here, not only because it's about things that America likes to defend, the rights of other countries and democracies and so on, but it's also important to our national interests, the cold, hard calculations of what keeps America safe. The United States has supported Ukraine and condemned Russia for its attack into Ukraine. And the United States and NATO together have said that this is a bad thing that's happening in Ukraine and that it threatens the rest of Europe. If the United States is not successful in ending this war or in countering Russia, then its standing around the world and in other theaters is in jeopardy too. Whether that's in Asia with China or Central America or in Africa or the Middle East, the power of the United States is greatly lessened if we are seen to have failed and Russia to have won.